I'm Margaret Hale, 67 years old, a widow standing in the aisle of St. Matthew's with a white rose wilting in my hand. The organ was still humming that tired hymn when I moved toward my husband's casket for a last touch, and my oldest son, Daniel, stepped in front of me. His suit smelled like cologne and impatience. "Mom," he said, as if I were a child who had wandered into traffic, "the line is over." People turn their faces the way people do when shame walks by wearing a name tag. I felt the chill of the air conditioning on my wrists and the heat of humiliation in my throat. Michael joined him, blocking me with an earnest frown and a practiced grip on my elbow. "We need to keep things moving," he whispered, though nothing was moving anywhere in me except the tremor in my fingers. Claire pretended not to see, studying the lilies as if they required supervision. Sophia pressed her lips into a straight, bright line. I had given those two women my trust, my recipes, my holiday tablecloths, and year after year they cataloged me like a household appliance. Useful, quiet, replaceable. "Please," I said. The word left me softer than I intended. My breath fogged the lacquered wood, and my rose shook. Robert had taught freshman philosophy for 35 years, and he believed decency was a habit. The habit failed my sons that morning. Daniel pivoted to the guests and clapped his hands once, asking them to take their seats. I stood with the rose drooping, the organ falling silent, the undertaker waiting with a patient face. A teenager with a camera phone lifted her arm and lowered it again, uncertain whether grief was content. The whisper grew into a fray of threads, tugging at me, pulling me back from the casket. I remember the click of my heels on the tiled floor, the faint squeak that said I had no traction. I remember the way the stained glass light washed Robert's cheekbone blue, then gold, then blue again. As if the church couldn't decide what to do with him. I did not cry. I steadied the rose, smoothed the petals, and turned. I walked down the aisle while my sons stared at the back of my head as if my silver hair had personally offended them. On the church steps, the March wind clawed through my jacket and left me with a question I could taste. If a son bars his mother from saying goodbye, what else will he take? And what else will I give? That question settled like a stone in my pocket, and I carried it out into the cold. After the reception in the church hall, people pressed my hands and told me I was strong. Strength, I learned, is a word the living hand each other when they have run out of anything useful to say. I stood beside trays of deviled eggs and a pyramid of paper cups and felt the room lean away from me. The pastor offered a prayer that ended with a bright Amen, the kind that pretends to be a door. When it opened, everyone flowed around me like a river breaking in two. Claire hovered near the dessert table, conferring with the caterer about leftover brownies as if grief were inventory. Sophia explained funeral etiquette to a cousin, which would have been funny if it weren't my life. Daniel approached, hands in his pockets, eyes red around the edges. He kissed the air near my cheek and asked if I had the keys to the house, then asked again before I could answer. Michael, ever the salesman, volunteered to handle the guests who wanted to stop by. "So you don't have to deal with clutter," he said, meaning people. I nodded because nodding is something a widow can do without breaking the room. I watched the brothers speak in low voices like men navigating a merger, not a funeral. They were comfortable in the role of managers. I saw how the posture fit them, how I had ironed it for years. When I finally made it home, the sunset burned low behind the bare maples and set the windows on fire. I set the funeral cards on the kitchen counter and listened to each small sound the house made by itself. The refrigerator sighed. The heat clicked on. Somewhere a floorboard settled, and I imagined Robert's slow, amused voice noting that entropy doesn't stop for sorrow. I answered him aloud and surprised myself. Talking to the dead is a private weather system. It rained and cleared and rained again inside me. The boys came late, bringing plastic containers and instructions. We'd meet with Mr. Bennett, our attorney, next week to review the estate. Michael said it with the cheerful certainty he used when showing a condo with bad light. Daniel assured me he had already spoken with the bank and the investment firm. He patted my shoulder with the quick courtesy he reserved for Uber drivers. I watched their mouths form plans that had no air for me. When the door closed behind them, silence blued the kitchen like dusk. I washed the wine glasses and felt the stem slip against my palm. The glass rang once, thin, pure, and I decided, while the sound still lived, that I would not let anyone narrate my life in the plural anymore. I dried my hands, opened the drawer with Robert's fountain pen, and wrote Mr. Bennett a note. We would meet. Yes. But I had things of my own to say. The pen lay heavy across the page like a small, honest tool. I forgot to be afraid. Mr. Bennett's office smelled like old leather and black coffee, the sort of place where decisions sit in frames. The four of us took our seats, and I folded my hands to keep them from trembling. I remembered coming here with Robert to sign papers that were more ceremony than substance. Marriage licenses, a mortgage refinance, the documents you pose with, smiling at a notary who is eager to finish her shift. Today there would be no smiles. Daniel rolled his neck as if preparing to lift something heavy. Michael checked his watch. Claire crossed her legs with a silky whisk. Sophia practiced empathy with her eyebrows. Mr. Bennett cleared his throat and read the will. He didn't perform it. That was his kindness. Robert's voice traveled through the paragraphs with its familiar restraint. He left specific keepsakes to the boys, books he had inscribed, a chess set with one knight repaired with glue from the afternoon we lost the original in the yard. He left a modest monthly allowance for each son. A courtesy. He called it, paid for 2 years from a separate account, and then he left the rest, including the house and the investments, to me. The room didn't move for a full 10 seconds, the sort of silence in which everyone sends a private memo to themselves and burns it. Daniel spoke first. That can't be right. Michael followed with a tight smile that had to be stapled in place. Claire asked whether there was a more recent document. Sophia wondered about capacity, the word landing on the table like a fork dropped from a height. I folded my hands tighter until my rings pressed crescents into my palms. Mr. Bennett went on. The will included a condition I had discussed with Robert if either son initiated a challenge to the will or questioned my competence in court. His allowance would end. It was a strip of caution tape Robert had stretched across the doorway of conflict. He had known his sons. He had hoped they would know themselves. I felt a swell of gratitude and another swell of grief that he had to imagine this possibility at all. I listened to my sons argue with the air as if the air could be persuaded. Then I heard my own voice, clear and stainless. I told them their father trusted me, and they could, too. I said it without heat. Sometimes the only way to speak to fire is with water. Daniel stood so quickly his chair barked against the floor. Michael asked Mr. Bennett for copies of everything, twice, before the printer had a chance to oblige. We left with envelopes that thudded against our thighs like small animals trying to escape. The next morning, Daniel called before the sun had its coffee. He wanted to revisit what Mr. Sati Bennett said, as if a will were an appointment you could reschedule. He spoke of fairness, which to him meant whatever he was holding and wanted to keep. Michael texted a screenshot of a blog post about undue influence and asked if I'd seen it. Claire sent a link to a retirement community that would solve logistics, by which she meant remove me from decisions. Sophia forwarded a spreadsheet with projected costs that ended in 3 neat exclamation points. I thanked them all and made breakfast the way I'd made it my entire marriage, with the calm attention that says the stove knows my name. I ate standing at the counter, because old habits fetch their own chairs. Then I called a realtor. By afternoon, a sign was in the yard, crisp and white. The kind that tells a neighborhood a story has turned its page. People slowed their cars to read it. One of them was Michael. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands on his hips, phoning Daniel while staring at the house as if it were a lifeboat and I were sawing the ropes. That night, I packed a suitcase with clothes that did not wrinkle easily and the small wooden box where Robert kept ticket stubs. I made a place for my fountain pen and my journal, a stout blue book that smelled faintly of glue. I checked into a hotel on the boardwalk, a place with carpets the color of oversteeped tea and a view of the Atlantic that forgot to apologize. The ocean does not ask what you plan to do next. It keeps doing what it is doing and invites you to notice. I walked the boards until the salt wind sanded my cheeks and the gulls braided their own arguments overhead. I wrote in the journal about the funeral, about the will, about the angle of the light on the water at 4 p.m. when the sky remembers how to be generous. I wrote that I was afraid and that I was also, improbably, relieved. Fear and relief do not cancel each other. They hold hands and stare in opposite directions. When Daniel called again, I let it ring until my phone stopped blinking like a small, stubborn lighthouse. I texted a single sentence, "I love you and your father's wishes stand." He replied with a wall of words I did not scale. A boundary is a door you install and then lock from your side. I slept with the journal open on the bedside table like a book of weather maps, the forecast for courage turning gradually clear. On Saturday, I carried Robert's wedding band to a jewelry shop off the boardwalk, the kind of place that could fix a clasp and also witness a life. The bell over the door rang with an old-fashioned confidence I envied. I told the jeweler I needed the band resized to fit around a chain. He nodded, palms gentle, and took the ring as if it were still warm. I had just tucked my hands into my coat when Claire breezed in, spring in a trench coat, voice bright enough to bounce off glass. She did not see me at first. She asked for a tennis bracelet to celebrate new beginnings. I could have kept quiet. Silence is a dress I have worn to many family occasions. But the jeweler turned the band in a cone of light, and the gold opened my mouth for me. I said hello. Claire startled, recovered, and tried on a smile that didn't button. "Margaret," she said, each syllable brushed. Then Michael arrived with Sophia, and Daniel trailed a minute later, as if the scene had been texted to them in a group chat called Crisis That Isn't Mine. Michael pointed to the ring and asked why I hadn't consulted them. Daniel accused Mr. Bennett of manipulation. Sophia began explaining probate to the room as if she were hosting a webinar. A woman by the display case pretended to study birthstone charms, but listened with the reverence we reserve for train wrecks. I felt my heart stamp against my ribs and then slow to a walk. I asked the jeweler to hold the ring a moment longer. I wanted to look at it while I spoke. I was kept from saying goodbye, I said to my sons, but also to the glass and the woman and the bell over the door. You will not keep me from honoring the rest. The shop went still. Michael tried a laugh that belonged to a different scene. Daniel shook his head and said I was letting grief make me vindictive. The jeweler, steady as a metronome, set the band on the felt and folded his hands. I told them about the condition in the will, not as a threat, but as a fence we would all be grateful to see in daylight. I said I would wear Robert's band around my neck because mourning, like love, changes shape and keeps on living. The woman by the charms dabbed her eye with a sleeve. Claire looked at the floor and then at the bracelet she had wanted. She put it back without asking for another size. We stood in a circle around the ring like hikers who had argued their way to an overlook and then remembered why they came. A teenager in the shop had recorded a portion of our exchange. By evening, the clip was online with a caption that misspelled my last name and got the point exactly right. I did not share it. I did not even finish watching it. I learned about the views from a neighbor who texted me a row of shocked faces. The comments arrived in flavors I didn't know people stalked: tenderness, anger, advice from strangers who loved the idea of law. Someone recognized Michael from a billboard featuring his brightest smile and suggested the smile had misrepresented itself. By Monday, his broker suspended him, pending review. Daniel's firm did not fire him, but a contract he had expected evaporated like breath on a cold pane. The boys came to the hotel. Daniel knocked with a careful rhythm as if politeness were an algorithm he could run until it produced mercy. Michael carried flowers that someone else had arranged. They said they were sorry for the funeral, sorry for the scene, sorry for letting things get out of hand. I poured tea into paper cups and waited for the apology to grow roots. It didn't. It hovered like steam and disappeared at the window. Daniel wanted me to issue a statement clarifying the context. Michael wanted me to meet with a family friend who handles optics. I wanted quiet. I told them I wouldn't manage their reputations or my grief in public. Their faces rearranged into versions of the boys I had raised, their childhood foreheads, their old stubborn mouths. I saw the smallness inside their bluster and felt a flicker of mercy that did not excuse them. I said I would help them as a mother helps, with listening, with meals, with the kind of truth that makes you sit down. But I would not alter the will, and I would not pretend their behavior had been an accident we'd all happened to bump into. Michael asked what I wanted in exchange. I told him I wanted them to learn the difference between inheritance and entitlement, between an allowance and a right, between decency done for witnesses and decency done because it is who you are when no one is looking. The hotel's radiator hissed like punctuation. When they left, the room settled into its original shape. I wrote until my hand cramped, noting the precise angle of relief I felt, which surprised me. Compassion without surrender. I mailed a check to the church in Robert's name and another to the philosophy department, where he had spent his life asking students to think about the good. I slept with the window cracked an inch, letting the sea practice its old language against the dark. By April, the for sale sign had a red strip across it that said, "Contract," and a month later, strangers posed in front of my former porch, pleased to imagine their future unfolding there. I signed where I was told and handed over keys that had warmed in my pocket for 22 years. The hotel clerk hugged me as if we had survived a small shipwreck together. I took a train north to a town where the beach is a daily thesis on change and rented a modest apartment with windows stubborn about sunlight. I bought a chain for Robert's ring and wore it low where I could hold it between finger and thumb when a memory tugged. I found a studio that teaches painting to adults who refuse to apologize for being beginners. On Tuesdays, I learned how to mix a sky that looks like it is breathing. On Thursdays, I learned how to let a mistake dry and paint over it without telling anyone. The young instructor kept saying, "Look longer," and I understood he wasn't talking about pears and shadows. I ate clam chowder at a counter where the waitress called everyone honey, and I learned the names of the fishermen who argued about weather like lawyers arguing precedent. I spoke out loud less. I listened more. Grief learned to sit in a chair without needing all the light. In June, I met with Mr. Bennett to establish a small charitable fund in Robert's name for older women who need a bridge between the life they were assigned and the life they are building. I wrote letters to accompany the grants in a hand that has improved with practice. I told each woman that dignity is not a prize you win at the end of endurance, but a garment you are allowed to put on and keep. The boys called sometimes. We have a new habit of shorter conversations that are more honest than long ones. They pay attention now when I say the word no. They have not become saints. Neither have I. But we are learning. It counts. Some evenings the sky stacks itself in colors that refuse translation, and I walk the shoreline with my hands in my jacket pockets, counting the boulders of good fortune and the pebbles of loss, and finding, to my surprise, that they weigh the same in the hand. I am not finished grieving. I am not finished living. The ring rests cool against my skin. When the wind rises, I think of the church and the aisle and the rose that shook because my hand did. I think of the question I carried out into the March cold and how it led me here, to an answer I can finally say aloud, I will not give what must be kept, not even to my sons, not even when the whole room is watching. I know some people will hear this story and shake their heads, wondering how a mother could stand so firm against her own sons. But love, I've learned, is not the same thing as surrender. For years I confused the two, giving until my hands were empty and then apologizing for not having more. Standing in that church aisle taught me that if I allowed my children to strip away my last goodbye, they would strip away everything else. Setting a boundary was not the opposite of love. It was the only way love had a chance to survive. These days, when I sit by the ocean and let the horizon settle my thoughts, I think about other women my age who are told to stay quiet, to hand over the keys, to fade gently into the background. I want them to know we are allowed to choose otherwise. Dignity does not come from permission slips signed by our children. It comes from the way we rise each morning and decide, once again, that our stories are still ours to write. My sons may inherit their father's eyes, but I will inherit his belief in decency. That is the legacy worth keeping. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.